Bum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-da, bum, ba-da-dum, ba-dum.
That sounds vaguely athletic.
Right now. It is, isn't it? Wasn't that Baseball Tonight?
I think. Oh yeah, that's what it is. Yes.
And in Sports
American
Center,
cricket.
Is it still? Ba-da-dun, ba-da-dun?
I think so. I haven't watched Sports Center in so long.
Did you know that when I was a wee lad, that my dream was to be a sports announcer?
No.
It's true. I'm not even lying about that.
What happened?
I don't know. I realized that I don't like sports.
I don't actually want to talk about this for hours at a time.
It was more like, but I do like baseball. Like that would have been a thing that I could have gotten on board with, you know, like, whoa, Nelly, like he's back, and it's gone. Like that would have been a lot of fun for me.
Okay.
Good evening, San Diego. I'm here with my compatriot. What are they called? I don't know. Co-announcer.
Co-anchor. Compatriot. I love how this got like weirdly revolutionary and political. My brother in arms.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm here with my brother in arms, and we're here to talk to you today.
So silly. What's going on?
Yeah. Just a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
I'll say, if there's any sports anchors that are listening to this podcast and they want to give Christian a shot at being their co-anchor for just drop us a line. Let's see if we can make that dream a reality.
It would be really funny to have like someone who knows absolutely nothing about whatever sport commentate on it. They're like, and then that one guy pass it to another guy. It looks like he's number 12. No, that's number 17. Number 17 goes down the field thing, and he ends up at the other side, and he throws the oddly shaped ball, and someone catches it. I don't know. Are they on the same team? I think they're on the same team, and he runs again.
That's right, Chip. I also don't know numbers.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking because like sometimes jerseys get all like wrinkled and stuff. You can't really tell. Like, is that a 2 or a? Oh, it's a 7. Like, because you get the little this part, but then you can't see if it turns into that part.
You blame it on the laundry. It's the static cling.
Mm-hmm.
Should have used bounce.
If I can't read a number, I won't blame the alcohol.
Blame it on the laundry.
Mm-hmm. No. I'm not. I'm going to take full responsibility for not being able to read those numbers. I'm not going to blame it on anything. Because that's the kind of guy I am, Steve. You know, I'm the realist.
I agree. This is why you should be announcing.
I know.
I'm telling you, I would watch that game.
So let this be effectively me tendering my resignation at Y2AM.
I don't accept.
Okay, well, then I guess I retract said resignation and unresign. So,
well, you never resigned to begin with, so you can't unresign.
See, now you're just making power plays.
Puts feet up on desk.
Yeah.
Maybe if I whisper and mumble, you have to lean in, and I have a power in the negotiation. That's a really good point.
What's that from?
When Michael Scott is negotiating with Daryl about his contract, and he goes to Wikipedia and he gets like the 10 tips about negotiation, and one of them is to lean back and just mumble very softly. The best bit of that is like he leaned backwards and he goes, and Daryl's like, "What was that?" And he goes, "That was a good point." And he like totally concedes. And then Daryl's making a good idea. He just whispers it.
Michael Scott.
Anyway,
Michael Gary Scarn.
Michael, somehow I manage. I've got my millions of dollars and my yacht and my HBO comedy album. There I go again. ... Anyway.
Yep.
What's new? What's new in Followup? What do we got to tell the people about?
Well, you know, we got Lent right here on our front doorstep.
It's coming. It's coming.
I heard this year meat's cool with Lent. Like meat and Lent are best of friends. Did you hear that? I heard that somewhere.
Did you read that on like a subreddit? Is that where you got that?
Yes.
A paleo subreddit.
It was paleo orthodoxy.
We're old school in a very specific kind of way.
Yeah, it's orthodoxy for cavemen. This ain't your grandma's orthodoxy. This is your great grandmother's orthodoxy.
You've heard of garments of skin. We eat garments of skin for breakfast. And lunch and dinner.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we're like Lent is coming. The Triodion is coming. So we're actually going to shift focus a little bit with B2B for some episodes, and we're just going to kind of like tie it to because every Sunday has a particular parable or a particular theme. So we're going to kind of like march along on our journey to Pascha.
Yeah.
So we actually just finished up an episode on the publican and the Pharisee, which is the first Sunday of the Triodion period, which as we were working on that episode and finalizing it, I was like, wow, this is really like a warning against so much nonsense on online orthodoxy too. Actually, the way that episode kind of came together, but you'll see when it comes out in a little bit. So that's happening. We just did some effective Christian ministry focus groups, which were super cool. We did a survey for those who have taken the course a couple weeks ago. The survey was great. I mean, really fantastic feedback. And we did a couple of focus groups with a researcher and found that people want us to finish the bonus module, which God willing and furloughs and layoffs permitting, we do want to do at some point.
Yeah. Excuses, Steve. Excuses.
I know. I tend to bite off more than I can chew, especially when we lose staff in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
But
then there were two.
And then, yes.
It's us, buddy. It's us.
Literally, this is Y2 AM.
This is Y2 AM. We put the 2 in Y2 AM.
That's right. The superscript has become a subscript. But that was one big thing. Way to put a triumphant spin on it.
Yeah.
That was so that's one big thing that people that we took away from the focus groups in particular. And also people really wanted more like small group opportunity, because people like kind of received this opportunity to be in a small group with other people, share what's working about the course, share where they're struggling. So people kind of were asking, like, we want more of this, just an opportunity to connect with other people. Because there are a bunch of parishes that are doing the course like as a community, which I think is the best way to do effective Christian ministry. So you're not the only person, but there's a lot of people who are like the only person in the community thinking this way. And it's hard. It feels like they're swimming upstream. So a lot of people just kind of want this connection with other people who are thinking this way about ministry and experimenting this way with ministry. So stay tuned, because we're hopefully working on that. And hopefully sometime in the next few months, we'll have something for people who've taken the course and want a little bit more support. So we hear you. Stay tuned.
Yep. We're coming for you. I mean, wait, that was way more aggressive than I wanted it to be.
We're coming for you.
And we're going to get you.
Oh man, on that really weird conflicted note.
We know where you live. I don't know why I'm channeling my inner psychopath. I'm so sorry, everyone.
It's better to channel it into the ether rather than like into the analog space. This is fine.
Into the internet where it will live forever.
That's true. That's true.
But
that's it. That's our follow-up. What are we doing today?
Well, today we are going to discuss. It's kind of took a little turn here. The girls, in their last episode, discussed the Netflix movie Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, I think is what the movie's called on Netflix. Is that right? That sounds right.
I haven't seen it yet. I don't remember. Yeah.
I haven't either. And frankly hadn't heard of it until they did it. So, but we kind of at that point decided that maybe it would be for the month of February, be an interesting, kind of way to do pop culture coffee or if we had like a kind of thematic element to it, given that February is Black History Month. So we're kind of spotlighting and highlighting some works of art that come from the Black community and Black artists. So today we are kind of moving forward with that move, and we're going to talk about Kendrick Lamar's 2017 album, Damn, period. It is, it might be, even as we're talking about it, it's probably like be something that people are like, oh my gosh, like why, I can't believe like you guys would talk about something like this. Because I mean, it's like a contemporary, secular, I mean, we'll talk about that and whether it really is. Secular hip hop album with this just like loaded with profanity. I mean, just like so much.
Yeah.
And like a lot of really kind of brutal and harsh images, but also tempered by a lot of, I think, like beauty and hope. And it's just a really interesting album that has continually showed up, especially like in 2017, it continually showed up as like number 1, number 2 album of the year. And has been spotlighted and highlighted in a lot of different lists as one of the most important albums of the 2010s. So it is just a remarkable album, and I'm super, super excited to discuss it.
Yeah, me too.
Hang in there with us.
Yeah, well, so caveat emptor at the very beginning, right? Because like you said, there is a lot of profanity on the album. There is a lot of like imagery which can be tough. And we've talked about this before. We've done movies and TV shows that sometimes has, some violence and other things. That's where you have to sort of know yourself and know your own limits. If that's something that makes you uncomfortable, if it's not, that's the sort of album that you'd feel comfortable listening to, that's totally okay. The reason that we're talking about it is because like, I think there is a lot of beauty to it, right? Again, it is for a more mature audience, certainly. So, I mean, we're not going to be like using bad words on the podcast or anything, but if you want to listen to the album, like just be mindful of that. There is some profanity and so forth. So, buyer beware.
With the possible exception of just saying the name of the album, because I don't know what else to call it. Dang. His album, dang.
Period.
Darn.
Dag Nabbit, the album.
Yeah, I was going to say Dagio. But
that's
even
fair.
Even that name, I think, is important itself.
Yes.
It actually is an important component of like this album, because I think there is like a if we're going to give a spoiler alert, there's a little bit, I think, of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of component to the album. So yeah. Well, do you want to give is there any other thing else we need to say about? I think maybe you can introduce the album a little bit more than I did.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit a lot of the really important points, right? It's Kendrick Lamar's 3rd album. It came out in 2017. I mean, it's an album, right? It's not really a story album as such, although I guess there is kind of a narrative.
I think there definitely is a one interwoven throughout it for sure.
Yeah, so I don't know if a spoiler alert is like, or a spoiler porg is like appropriate here, because it's not really like a narrative in the way that a TV show or a movie would have a narrative. But again, you've been warned,
do you think it
right?
At least calls for a spoiler boing.
Oh man, those were the days. Long-time listeners of the podcast will know and be scandalized by that reference. That's funny. Thank you for bringing that up again. I missed the spoiler boing. That was like when pop culture was pure and not self-aware.
Yes, exactly.
But anyway, like, so the album is incredibly like well received, both critically and commercially. A really cool thing that highlights, I think, the impact and the beauty and the artistry of this album. Like, it actually won the Pulitzer Prize for music in 2018. And really interestingly, it was the first non-classical or non-jazz album to do so, which kind of makes sense, right? I think we have like this sense that classical music is classy and jazz music is sophisticated. This was the first album outside of those two genres to win the Pulitzer Prize, which is, I think, really fascinating. And the fact that this has this legitimate sort of artistic chops. And yes, it's difficult. And I think a lot of people might kind of reject it because on its surface, it does have a lot of that profanity and sort of difficult imagery. But, again, because there are pieces of art that deal with mature themes, and this deals with like you were saying before, that damned if you do, damned if you don't, some of the tragic elements of human existence, and it expresses that accordingly. But if there is a narrative theme, right, maybe like, well, one of the cool things about the album, and I haven't tried this yet, but apparently like you can listen to it forwards and backwards, not playing it in reverse, right, but the order of the tracks,
the order of the songs in reverse,
backwards and forwards. And it's kind of this different, like when you listen to it with the release sort of way, it's this move towards sort of like humility. It's this move towards kind of like, but if you do it in reverse, it's kind of like the fall of somebody who starts in kind of a pure, enlightened sort of situation and then gets kind of caught up in the passions and caught up into sin. Because there are these deep existential things going on.
I think even actually in the reverse, it ends up being this kind of like fatalistic. It's not even like a, there's less of a choice almost that it seems. Cause like, it ends with him saying like, this is just in my DNA, right? Like that's how this ends. It's like, it's in my DNA. As opposed to kind of like, what happens at the very end of it's just, there's so much to this album that I don't know how we can possibly do it service, like the more I listened to it, the more I was just like, oh my gosh, like there are so many things happening that he's trying to do with it. And I felt dizzy almost, like trying to like put my thoughts together about it, because there's just so many interlocking ideas and themes and hard questions that he's asking and ways that he's making us look at ourselves, ways that he's looking at himself. So I don't know how we can even begin to skim the surface of this just remarkable work of art. Like it is, I mean, I listened to it nonstop for the last week trying to understand it, and I just can't get all of it, I keep finding layers, and it is, I don't use the word loosely to say that it is evidence of his genius, like that there's just so much happening. Which will be 2 in a row for us, because last time on Community, we barely scratched the surface. Be prepared. Like, we're not going to be here for 4 hours, like there's a lot that we're not going to get to, but we'll do our best. Yeah, exactly. So I came across this thing today, and I felt like it perfectly summed up kind of one of the, I feel like when we're looking at this album, right, like there is just so much complexity to it. And there's these tensions that he kind of introduces in the whole thing. And I think that to me seems to be kind of like the backbone of everything to this album. That he kind of, at the very beginning, at least in the release order, like when you listen to it in like the normal way,
which is how we're going to work off of it for the most part.
The album begins with this lyrically beautiful couple of questions where he says, is it wickedness? Is it weakness? You decide. Right? Like there's kind of this question of like the condition of humanity. And I think in some ways too, like what Kendrick Lamar is doing is even asking on a deeper level, like on the question of blackness, right? Like I think there is kind of, we would be remiss, I think, if we didn't contextualize a lot of it to his experience and like of growing up in the hood, like the dudes from Compton had friends die in gang battles and things like this. So like there's some real pain that's behind the stuff that he's writing. And it's stuff that I think we probably generally don't want to look at,
Yeah. Because even the history of Compton, right, is an interesting, like, complex thing. Because Compton, right, was like a suburban sort of community outside of Los Angeles. Like Kendrick, like Lamar's family, like he's originally from Chicago, I think, his family, and his family moves to Compton. And there's a lot of families that go to Compton because it's like, a place where you have a lawn and a yard and a palm tree out front, right? And it's supposed to be this kind of escape from some of the gritty whatever that you're leaving behind. But then even Compton sort of becomes this like stereotypical, gangbangy, whatever kind of situation, right? So like this question of like corruption, or this question of fatalism, or whatever it is, right? Even as people are moving towards this place that's supposed to represent like a fresh start and opportunity, even gets overrun, right? So like this question of DNA, this question of like the historical inertia, like it's right there from the beginning in his life.
Yeah.
Even.
Yeah. And I think like it's so hard. Like I'm gonna stumble over myself so much this next hour. I apologize to everybody in the universe. But I think the like kind of the grounding, framework for all of this is like we have to see this through, I think in some ways, kind of like the lens of the cross, right? Like everything in this has to be seen that way. And like I was thinking through that idea like yesterday actually, and this morning just suddenly came across this from Richard Rohr, who is a I think a Franciscan priest. Franciscan sounds right. And he has this like he runs this place in New Mexico called the Center for Contemplative the Center for Action and Contemplation, or something like that. Center of Action and Contemplation. And in this book he wrote called Everything Belongs, which is just I think a really beautiful book. He suggests, right, that like what we need to begin to see is that like in the economy of God, all things belong, right? That there is no kind of like, there's nothing that's left out of his grasp, and there's nothing that's left out of his love. And so he ends his book with this idea where he says, God is to be found in all things, even and most especially in the painful, tragic, and sinful things, exactly where we do not want to look for God. The crucifixion of the God-man is at the same moment the worst thing in human history and the best thing in human history. Human existence is neither perfectly consistent, as rational and control-needy people usually demand it to be, nor is it incoherent chaos, what cynics, agnostics, and unaware people expect it to be. Instead, human life has a cruciform pattern. It is a coincidence of opposites, as St. Bonaventure says, a collision of cross purposes. We are all filled with contradictions needing to be reconciled. And I was like, dude, like if ever there were a thesis for this album, like that is it.
Yeah.
I read that and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is damn. Like this is what I've been listening to all week of finding some way to reconcile these tensions and these contradictions, these cross purposes, he calls them, which I just love. And to live in that tension is going to be some level of crucifixion, right? It's going to be painful and uncomfortable. And we have to do some work. We can't just like go into this kind of like nice, kind of easy, whitewashed, non-suffery Christianity.
Yeah.
We have to
work and rest at the same time, right? Because like the tensions are never really going to be resolved. Like it's not, you're never going to be able to solve your way out of these tensions. You just kind of like have to sit in them and work in them, whatever that means, right? But this, like you said, this is the nature of reality. This is the nature of these existences. And it's a very Dionysian sort of motif. Like even as you're reading Rohr's comment, like Saint Dionysius the Areopagite, we'll talk about this, how there's nothing that exists, right, that is perfectly disconnected from God. Like God is the existence of existing things, right? Everything that is because it has some, even if it's a tenuous, right, some level of connection to God. Like he is still there, and there is still this like potential, and there is still this like, this thread at the very least that connects everyone and everything to him. There's nothing that is completely graceless or completely on the outside, which is, as you read, right, like a challenging thought. Like God is still there, from the highest mountain to the lowest like valley, the deepest, darkest thing. Like he's still there, which means there's still hope and possibility and potentially even some beauty in these difficult situations.
I had a professor in college, my theater professor, he always used to say, I keep finding Jesus in places I thought he didn't have any business being. And like that to me, I think kind of has laid the foundation for like so much of what, is going on here. Like I found the Lord all through this album. And I don't mean in the sense of like, praise and exaltation and like glory be to God for all things kind of stuff. But in this sense, and this is often how we would evaluate like what plays we did. And sometimes we would even get, because I went to a Christian college, we would get some flack from people because we would have like moments where like things were happening, they were like, oh, like they had characters, like, I mean, they weren't actually smoking cigarettes. They had like candy cigarettes that they were like, putting in their mouths and stuff like this. As
puffs
like
of sugar. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, but that was like scandalous. Or we had set a play in a bar at Wheaton College. You know what I mean? Like that was a scandal to people. But they would miss the larger questions or the larger framework, because it was like these things that they were so, caught up in. And the way that he would talk about it or evaluate things was like, does this work of art, when I'm engaging in this thing, does this make me feel my need for Jesus more or less? Does this lead me toward him or away from him? Right. And like, there's some things I think that like, at the end of this, like listening to the album, I was just like, oh, like, Lord have mercy. You know what I mean? Like there was like so much in me that just wanted to like fall into God.
Yeah.
As opposed to something like Breaking Bad, which left me just feeling like falling into nothingness.
Yeah.
And that was ultimately, I think, why I couldn't watch Breaking Bad.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I still haven't tried watching it. Yeah.
No, don't care. I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have no doubt that it's really good television. Like, there's no part of me that's like wondering about that. But ain't nobody got time for that.
Well, and that's the thing. And some people can, right? Which is, this has been a theme in the podcast from the very beginning, right? Like, neither of us are able to watch Breaking Bad. We both have friends who love it, who can talk about some really wonderful themes. Like, if it is something that works for you, if it is something that speaks to you and can actually be edifying for you, like, that's fine. I think both of us, like, this album might not be edifying for you, or it might be difficult for you, but we're here talking about it because there is something beautiful about this. And like, even the scope of the album, right, which starts with this fatalism and ends with mercy. I mean, like, that last track, which has the breaking of this cycle. I mean, there's something so Christological even about that. Mercy defeating this fatalism, mercy defeating this like cycle of death and violence. I mean, I remember like the first time I listened to this album, even like, you just sort of exhale at the end, because it builds up this tension and all these contradictions. And they do kind of like, I don't want to say they fully resolve, right? But there is this level of rest at the end where like, okay, that's how the cross sort of like sits at the end of this.
Yeah. Because I mean, the thing ends with a gunshot, like that really is kind of like the final note on all of it. But even to that point, right? Like, there's this, what he does so brilliantly throughout this whole thing is like these reversals, right? Like he even contrasting like just the song titles themselves, right? Lust and love, pride, humble, fear, God.
Yeah.
Even the connection there with blood and DNA, right? Like, those are the first two tracks. And what you really get there is that the question of like, this is just in my DNA and all of that kind of stuff. But then in the last track, you get to, the song Duckworth, and it's a song about his dad. And what you begin to realize is that it's actually in his DNA, in his blood, right? That like has reset the course in some way, like through this mercy that the dad showed to a criminal, right? Like, is really kind of how that plays out. And he's like thankful for the mercy and the humanity, but this criminal shows, which is like, it's not just in his DNA to kill either. Because if it were, he would just kill the guy. Yeah. Right. So there's this like really interesting dynamic where it's like, is it my blood, or was it this choice? Or like, it still stays with like, is it wickedness or weakness?
Yeah.
And how and you don't really know, but you kind of get both.
Yeah. Yeah. And his posture, right? Like, Kendrick Lamar's posture before all of this is gratitude, because like the story, right? The story as he presents it in that album Duckworth. And again, zooming out, he talks about this, like, the violence that's in the DNA, this kind of like, again, kind of the brutal existence that he grew up sort of experiencing. And then he has his dad who's working at this shop, who like realizes like the shop has been robbed before, right? So what does he do? He gives free chicken out to people. He kind of smooths thing over. He's the merciful guy who's trying to be the peacemaker. And then this guy comes in to rob it and spares the life of his dad, right? So like Kendrick gets to grow up with a dad, unlike so many other people who grow up in a really difficult situation. And then 15 years later or 20 years later, that guy who has since like started a record studio, like signs Lamar when he's like 15 or 16. And you have these two men who's like this chance encounter, free chicken, spared life. Suddenly, the son of the one becomes the musical protege of the other, and it's like this one choice. It's almost eucatastrophic, right? Yeah. It's like Bilbo's mercy on Gollum, which kind of pays off in the long run, like in terms of the actual destruction of the ring. Like this one sort of act of mercy, like in this heist, right, in a random chicken shop, like unlocks all of this art and beauty, right? And Kendrick says like the greatest, rapper of all time, like comes from this act of mercy. There's this like gratitude and awe behind this, right?
He calls it coincidence. Yeah.
But is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then there's also the bit too, where he ends it with two being like, and I would have grown up, like if that hadn't happened, right, I would have grown up without a father and I would have probably been like shot. And then that's when the gunshot happens. And you kind of are left still with like, oh, but like, that's still reality.
Yeah.
Like, oh, people still are just getting shot. And it's not just a story of like, and everything was happy ever after.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Which like, I don't know how he manages to pull off like gut punches in almost like every song, but he does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because this unlocks these questions of like deeper structural sort of issues, right? I mean, like it's kind of this one choice that breaks the cycle for this one family, but is that the exception, right? Like is that sort of gunshot this thing that is the reality for a lot of other people who aren't quite as fortunate, right? Because they're able to like be the inheritors of mercy, right? At the same time, like it raises all these complex questions about like the choices we make, the systems that fatalistically sort of spur us in a particular direction. I mean, yeah, gut punch.
Well, and I think that that's what he does so well throughout the whole thing is he walks both sides so like mercifully. Like there's just this kind of full identification kind of like with all of it. Both like I'm thinking in DNA when he begins it, the way he begins his rap there is like, I got royalty, you got loyalty inside my DNA, right? So there's like this, beautiful kind of wealth to his DNA, right? Royalty and loyalty, and then he also kind of later on in the song goes on to like, I know murder, conviction, burners, boosters, burglars, ballers, dead, redemption, like scholars, fathers, dead with kids, right? Like there's so many like things that he just like spits out there, which, and I mean, that song is just like, it feels like a war anthem to me in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's because, especially when you get to that last bit where he's just spitting out so much all at once. And it's just wild. But when the way he does this is so brilliant, because even in that song, I feel like he kind of stands on both sides of it. And some parts kind of like stands in the place of like protagonist and sometimes in the role of antagonist. To like his own journey through this album. And eventually you get to the point where he goes, it was always me versus the world until I found it's me versus me. Why? Right?
Yeah.
Like there's this, you realize kind of like at the end of the day that these things, it's not just like, oh, like the bad stuff is out there, right? Like it's somewhere far from me.
Yeah.
Well, that like the bad stuff's just in Compton, or it's like in the conservatives or the liberals or the whoever, right?
The other,
like
the other.
Yeah. But he kind of goes, oh no, like everything that happens out there. And he even in some of his interviews, like, he speaks about like folks getting killed in the streets. And he says, I am them.
Yeah.
There's this sense that he just has of like solidarity with the world, right? That he's actually able to locate within himself the very things that he's calling to question.
Yeah.
Which I think is what humility and love does.
Yeah. And it's a profoundly Christian point, right? I mean, like now we're sort of like unlocking like these overtly Christian themes that are in the album, right? Because how can you not hear, I used to think it was me versus the world, but it's me versus me, and not hear an echo of like St. Paul talking about being the foremost among sinners, right? And my point is not to sort of like identify and blame the sin on the outside, but to address the brokenness within my heart, and I start there, or something that like St. Paisios the Athonite would say that, or you get this in like Elder Zosimus and the Brothers Karamazov as well, that like I am guilty of all before all.
Yeah.
Right. Which again, like this
alone have corrupted the universe.
Yeah.
Like these are the things he says.
Like that's my fault. If I was more holy, if I was more loving, these gunshots wouldn't ring out. Right. Those are sort of like outward manifestations of my own brokenness. And like I take responsibility as Christ takes responsibility on the cross. Right. I mean, these are like profound sort of thoughts, and which is such another way of like reconciling these like opposite polarities, right? Not me versus you, not us versus them, but like to take it in and to sort of like bear it in love and solidarity is a powerful thing.
Yeah. And it's not like a happy thing, right? Like, but there's a joy to it that comes from, I think, being able to like stand in solidarity with the rest of humankind, to be able to see yourself in them. And like, again, like Richard Rohr kind of talks to this like, this idea too. He says like, never expect like perfection to kind of happen in this world, like just don't expect it. Like instead do all that you can to be peace and to do justice, but don't expect like perfection in the world. Otherwise it's going to lead to this kind of like weird false moral like superiority. Like, well, I know what's right, and I which I definitely can like see in myself, like kind of going into some of that, but instead to like kind of be able really to focus on like, okay, can I do peace, or can I be peace, can I do justice, and still work for like those things to change, like for things that do need to change. It's not just about being right with God, and I think that's what like Kendrick kind of does here, because he brings up so many things, and I think this almost is why he's offensive to to white Christian sensibility, right? Honestly, like I think that's what it is, because he's talking about like really just like horrible stuff that he's seen and been through,
and
personally
experienced.
Like he's seen people killed in the streets. He's been through just like hell, and we're like, can you please stop swearing? And it's like, we don't want to look at it, what 90% of the world faces, which is just like pain and not abundance and exploitation. Like these are real things, and when he brings them before us with like the language of transgressors, like we are offended, and we're like, can you like not do that, please? And like, I have young ears here, and like, I get that. Like, I really get that, because I don't want my kids listening to Damn.
Sure, of course.
They'd be like, what's that? And plus it's just like, it's too much. But do I think that maybe one day, like, I would love to sit down and talk about it with them? Yeah, for sure. Because like, there's something in it, right? I think that we have to wrestle with, like, and it may not be that we have to wrestle with Damn, but whatever he's doing in it, I think that's what we need to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Right. And like, as I'm hearing you saying this, like one of the core sorts of things is just learning to listen and learning to be empathetic. Right. Because like Kendrick Lamar's experiences are not my experience, to be totally honest. Right. Like I could never write an album like this or speak kind of in a firsthand way when it comes to experiences like this. And yet this is one of those things that art does, which is so important in terms of actually like leading to this kind of like solidarity and sort of co-suffering amongst people, because it's nothing that I can experience myself, but like if I can open my heart up to receive it, right, and to sort of sit with somebody as he tells a story like this, like that changes. And one option, right, is to treat this as a threat because like it's not my experience or because it makes me uncomfortable, but reality is uncomfortable, right? Like just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean that it's not true. I can't be sort of a solipsist and just sort of like have blinders to the difficulties because I've been well fed my entire life and because I've had a roof over my head the entire life and because like I'm comfortable. No one's afraid of me when I walk down the street, whatever it might be. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's the difficulty of empathy
for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, like one of the, even that refrain, right, which comes up so much, like the sense of like the reality of prayer, right? Like this sense, like there is a God above who's caring for me, but there's nobody praying for me down below. Right. I mean, like even like these tragic things that he's bringing up, like,
I know. And I think there is, like, we can talk more about that too when we get, particularly, I think, to Kendrick's faith, which I think is such just an important. I mean, like, I have no problem listening to him and going like this dude is a believer, you know, like whatever else, like he, his faith is tortured, but I think it's real, like I really feel it from him, and I get like what he's doing, because especially like when you consider who the dude is, like on his own, like I read some article on his, just on like how he kind of approaches Christianity and his own faith. And apparently the dude is like, compared to, other like hip hop mainstream artists, like he's basically kind of like, they call him in the article, like an ascetic, that he doesn't go to like strip clubs. He doesn't smoke weed. He rarely ever drinks. He's in a monogamous relationship with his high school sweetheart.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? Because you like listen to his album and it's like that doesn't seem to check out. But again, I think that's part of the reason why is because he sees himself so united to everything around him that he goes like, oh, whatever's happening out here is me too.
Yeah.
Which I think like that is, even to kind of bring it, back to, to like the Athenites, right? Saint Silouan, to kind of would speak of the enlargement of the heart, like the heart becomes so big that it contains the whole world within it. Yeah. And like that is a painful thing to hold.
Yeah.
There is so much suffering, but there's like a joy because like I can now experience all my brothers. Yeah. Like it is that tension of pain and joy that only can be described as good. Yeah. Right. Like that's ultimately what it comes down to. And what I think like Kendrick does throughout all of this thing, right, is like he speaks about kind of even carrying this troublesome heart, right? In DNA, that there's something like, because he even says like I got a troublesome heart, Yeah. And that's important, I think, for this.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because you can read, again, all of these verses, right? I think you can read on a variety of levels. Like the first thing that hit me when I heard that verse, and I think kind of a dominant thing that keeps hitting me, is like what a powerful affirmation of like God's mercy in the midst of it, right? Like the mercy that he's personally experienced, like just knowing his own sin, right? Because like a big thing that comes out in this album, like Kendrick Lamar clearly has like a concept of sin, a concept of like sort of inner brokenness, of right and wrong. Definitely. And this like divine judgment that sort of comes and chases, right, or follows this sin. And yet he's gotten off. Like God hasn't sort of cast him into the fire, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's one layer of this, right? He knows what he deserves, and yet God hasn't given him what he deserves. There's the mercy that he experiences from his dad, right? In the Duckworth song, like he could have had so much less in his life, but he has sort of received his mercy. He got off, right? He grew up with a dad, like all these sort of like layers to this. Mm-hmm. And yet it like the sort of like the dialectical cycle between this is interesting, right? Because his response to this mercy is not laziness or sort of entitlement or anything. His response to this mercy is actually like to double down on the wounds within his own heart and to sort of continue to be like penitential and humble before this, right? Like Like, it's kind of to see God face to face, right, is to sort of like fall down on your face, because like when you're aware of his love and goodness, right, it's like you can't be comfortable in the face of that, right?
Yeah.
Like this light sort of like shines, and like everything that's within you sort of gets laid bare, and like humility is the only posture before that. To say that I have this troubled heart in light of all of this mercy that I received, right? Not that like I'm scot-free and I can go and there's no consequences, but like I'm free of consequences, but I carry this inner wound because I know like I don't deserve this, right? I know that there is still work that needs to be done. I know that I still wrestle with these questions of wickedness and weakness, and I don't want that for me.
Yeah. It's interesting because like I feel like there's always a tension. There's always a tension. Live in the tension. Just live in the tension, Steve. Just live in the tension. Oh, it's so tense.
Oh, we're cramped up.
Yeah. Ow.
Get a banana. Ow.
Potassium. Do you always think of Honey, I Shrunk the Kid? Was it Honey, I Blew Up? Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. When like the
sequel
kid starts like having cramps or something. I can't remember. And the sister's like, bananas have potassium. Like that's how I only know that.
Thank you, Rick Moranis.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't remember that scene. I don't.
Like some kid is like, maybe he's going into a diabetic coma. I can't remember exactly what's going on, but there's something bad. There's something bad going on. He needs potassium for some reason, and that's why. So that's how I know about bananas and potassium and cramps and etc. Anyway,
brought to you by the banana growers of America.
Yeah. Because I think the thing that you can easily get into with things like this, and I think this is kind of what's problematic about like some thinkers like Jordan Peterson, is that like they tend to kind of like, you can go kind of like a super conservative way with this, right? And say like, and I don't just mean politically conservative, I mean like that's just kind of like leaning towards like nothing outside self really needs to change, right? Like that's kind of what conservative means, like keep it together. So there's I think kind of a locus of the problem being the individual, right? And well, if he just worked on himself and he just got right with God, then like everything would be fine. There's kind of this like tendency to put on like individual responsibility,
sure,
and like just get right with God, as opposed to I think kind of like the more liberal ideology tends to be like, hey, things are so screwed up, we really need to fix this system. It's like, let's tear it all down and rebuild it.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that like neither one of those really seems to even be what Kendrick would say.
Totally.
Like I think he would point to like, no, like it's both.
Yeah. Yes.
Like,
and yeah.
Yeah. And like, things are bad and things need to change.
Yeah.
And like God's judgment is real, and we should probably repent as well as change things in the world.
Yeah. Which I think, right, like that is so much more of like an accurate like Christian cosmology, right? Like you mentioned Saint Silouan before, like my brother is my life. Like there is no just me versus God. That like that stereotypical kind of like conservative mindset of just get yourself right with God. Like that is very much a post-Reformation like rise of the individual, right? It's like the decline of the person, the rise of the individual. Like it's just me. I am this kind of like atom, and it's like me and my relationship with God, me and my Bible. That's all that matters, right? Like that's, like it or not, right? That does not come from sort of like traditional church ecclesiology. That's very much a post-Reformation, post-Enlightenment ideal. But then the sort of the liberal side, again, that's a postmodern sort of ideal, which looks to sort of like just structures. And if you think about it, right, like it erases sort of like agency and causality. It's got this very sort of Greek classical, like it just looks at the world and the sort of brokenness of the world, and what you do doesn't matter. And they're both wrong by themselves.
Yes.
They're both wrong.
So there has to be a third way, right? There has to be a third way.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, of both. It's got to be. It's got to be both. And we have to, I think, acknowledge that like there are structures and systems in place that are like actually not good. You know, like
Yes.
there are things in the world that are quite frightening. And I think that like this is what Kendrick really, again, just brilliantly speaks to. You know, that like even in that song XXX, because I think what he really does pretty well is actually lift a mirror to an X-rated America.
Yes.
And that's why I think we get really uncomfortable, because it's like, yeah, this is actually who we are in all of our beauty and in all of our kind of like filth.
Yeah.
You know, and he even kind of says it right from the get-go, right? America, God bless you if it's good to you.
But it's not good for everybody.
Yeah, correct. Including but not limited to Kendrick Lamar himself.
Yeah.
Right. And even, you know, we could point to him and be like, oh, but look, because of whatever, he succeeded. And I don't think that he would say like, I succeeded because of America.
Yeah.
I think he would probably say, I succeeded in spite of America.
Yeah.
You know, like in spite of the things that are in place, you know?
Well, and there's even more complexity to it, right? Because I think it's in triple X. I don't know how you pronounce it. Is it triple X, whatever, however you pronounce it?
He
yeah. Now we're in like we're playing 3D chess here.
3D X's.
he mentions like Tupac, and he mentions like some previous, you know, rappers who hit it big, and the pressures, right? Even of like the kind of the classical American story of like making it big, you know, becoming a household name, making money. Like there is no salvation even in that, right? Mm-hmm. There's apparently like there's references to the song, to this conspiracy theory that like Tupac, you know, this like very famous 90s rapper, faked his death and went to Cuba or something because like he couldn't handle the pressures of stardom and fame. And it's just like this difficult sort of position to be in. It's not necessarily winning. It's just a different kind of pressure and a different kind of like oppression. So that even complicates it. Like even winning, right? The way that the rules of the game have been set up isn't necessarily like liberating or freeing. It's a different kind of pain.
And the way that he even talks about it in that song is just, especially in that last verse, it's really intense. You know, like he begins with this kind of, again, like this religious like prayer, right, of like Hail Mary, Jesus and Joseph.
Yeah.
Right. Like kind of, again, claiming like a prophetic role a little bit, right? And then he says the great American flag is wrapped in drag with explosives.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, oh, geez. It's murder on my street, your street, back streets, Wall Street, corporate offices, banks, employees, and bosses with homicidal thoughts. Right?
Yeah.
But and he says, but is America honest, or do we bask in sin?
Yeah.
Pass the gin and mix it with American blood. It's like, dude, dude.
That's intense. That's intense, right?
Slow it down.
Yeah, and there's even that like that very kind of self-aware line where he talks about like it's, you know, it's a reflection. Like he's holding a mirror up to what is, and he realizes it makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, and then you know what he the way he says it too, right? He says America's reflections of me.
Yeah.
That's what a mirror does. Right. And so he's doing, and this is the thing that he does. He's like, it's like, it sounds like this thing, but then he goes like,
yes,
you know, and
I have blood on my hands
because it's in me. Yeah. The only reason I see it there is because I see it in me. And this is a mirror. It's a mirror that shows me, you know, inside of the human heart, right, is the seed of every sin.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, you know, I think is another riff on something that we've talked about a lot on this podcast, about that whole, like, what does it mean to be secular sort of thing? Mm-hmm. Like, I think that kind of like that distance is something that we do sometimes as contemporary Christians. Like secularism is out there, but we've said it a million times, right? Like we're all secular. And when we look at some of these things on the outside, like that's us. You know, we look at the way that we sometimes like turn our nation into an idol, right? Like that's a very sort of like secular kind of like mindset, right? Totally. You know, like all of these things on the outside that we're a part of. Here we are on the internet in the year 2021. Like we're just as postmodern as anybody, and that's something that needs to be reckoned with, right, and repented of, right?
Yeah, totally.
But it's there. And it totally makes us uncomfortable, right? Because it's so much easier to just sort of like point the finger at the sin at the outside, right? Like
Yeah.
you're lazy and didn't pull yourself up by your bootstrap, or the system is broken and nothing can be done. Like, as opposed to like,
or,
man.
Yeah. Yeah. I think definitely the sin that I see most more in the church is like everything is kind of fine. It's just like you who are the problem, right? Like you need to go to church and you need to pray and you need to keep the fasts and you need to try harder and you need to do more. And like, so please stop swearing and please, right? And all of that kind of stuff. Cause I think like the tension is like recognizing our own complicitness in the things that have like made it so that people make the choices that they make.
Yeah.
You know, like if it's just I don't know, it's
which, right, like that's ancestral sin.
Yeah.
Right. Like, again, this is part of our like cosmology as Orthodox Christians, right? When we talk about like, original sin versus ancestral sin, like we're just, we live in the consequences of brokenness, right? Like it's that patristic sort of line that, Adam and Eve sinned and death came into the world. We die, therefore we sin. We talked about Panayoti Nalas and his kind of like survey of the fathers who talk about this, right? Like the brokenness of the outside actually kind of shapes our own sort of inner brokenness and creates this vicious cycle that only Christ finally breaks, right? Like sin enters the world, death, like we die, therefore we sin. Like that's what happens when you talk about neighborhoods that are broken or families that are struggling. Like this is another sort of instantiation of the weight of ancestral sin. And some of us feel it more than others because some of us like grow up in homes with addiction, or some of us grow up in homes with poverty, right? And others of us don't. But just because there was food on my table doesn't mean there wasn't food on somebody else's table, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like,
and I think this is where we have to again move to recognize our own solidarity with the rest of humankind, right? Because as long as there is food on my table and not on yours, I'm complicit in that.
Yeah.
Like I'm, and even I think it was Saint Simeon, the new theologian, who said that like dang it. How does he say it? Like the man who would love his neighbor as himself will never be content with having more than his neighbor. Like that is kind of the thing of like, to see like that there must be, if there is inequity, right? Like there needs to be something that is like panged in my heart to do something about that. Right? Because it's like, if I'm going to love all as all, and to have an enlarged heart, as Saint Silouan and Saint Sophrony would say, then like there is some reckoning of like my participation in ancestral sin that levies inequities against other people. Like I'm a part of that system as well. And by system, I don't just mean like governmental system. I mean like cosmic system.
Yeah. Some order.
Everything is one. Everything is together. And I think this is one of the things that we don't even understand kind of normally, is that like our oneness with the world, even in all of nature, like we use it, right? So we think that we are separate from it somehow, but really like we're just, I thought about this the other day. Like I was laying outside with my wife and it was just very, very sunny because Phoenix, I know you just had a snowstorm, so I'm sorry, but it was sunny and hot and I was uncomfortable. And I said, I wish someone could turn off the sun. And my wife just goes, yeah, right. We'd all die. And I was like,
not immediately.
We'd have like 8 minutes though. Like, but there was that moment where, she was like totally like keyed into the idea, like, no, like we need the sun, and we need the trees and we need the bees and we need, like, we're actually dependent on the world around us. And like, we need to let that be something that actually puts us in our place. But to recognize again that oneness that I participate in, this like ancestral sin, it now kind of shapes, I think, a better understanding of why forgiveness vespers is a thing, right? Like why we have to, because I don't know how me doing a thing shaped a world in which you've suffered. Yeah. Like I don't know that. But I probably have, because things, like even if it was like some online comment that I made in a forum about whatever that galvanized someone toward a particular end and they lashed out at you, and like that's on me.
Yeah.
Like I'm connected to that.
Yes.
And I think that's an important thing.
And that's, I think, something that uniquely we struggle with as Americans. A critique that I've heard of American society a lot, which makes a lot of sense actually, is that we have this very sort of zero-sum game sense of how the world works. Like somebody else's success is actually a threat to me.
Yeah.
Right. Like if somebody, which is so contrary to that quote from Saint Simeon, right? Like somebody else putting food on their table is like a threat to the food on my table, or somebody else kind of like rising socioeconomically is a threat to me. Because again, like it or not, right? There's a kind of a myth of America as like a Christian country, whatever it is. It's like, it's very much an Enlightenment country, very much a post-Reformation country. It's like a particular flavor of Christianity, right? A particular kind of cosmology and a worldview that, has internalized like this post-Enlightenment sort of individualism, that hasn't internalized this like Hobbesian sort of war of all against all, right? Like that's built into the American story. We left the old country. And even when we talk about like the myth of religious freedom or whatever it is, like we left the old country because we were being persecuted, so we can come here and persecute other people.
Yes.
And, like we burned witches in this country. Like, it's a complicated.
And then used religion to like justify that, like I'm thinking about like letters that, I came across from some Spanish priest, like writing back to his bishop in Spain, when he witnessed like the horrors of like the slave trade and slavery, in America. And he was like, bro, huh? Like that's what the letter said. It says literally, hey bro, huh? ... Yeah. What the? He's like, you all know what's going on? And the bishop writes back like, no, it's cool. We prayed about it.
Woof.
Double woof.
Yeah.
No, it's cool. We prayed about it.
Yeah.
It's just there, the utter like pride, right, that comes along with like such a statement as that is just, basked or like masked and masquerading as like humility and like subservience, right? Like that there's something like about obeying God in that, which is the same kind of mentality, right? That like early Americans used to like basically beat their slaves into submission, right? Of like, no, this is like the God ordained kind of like thing, right? Which again, I think is what Lamar spends a lot of time pushing back against.
Yes.
Especially when you get to like songs like Humble.
Yes.
Which is just in the music video to that song. Did you watch it?
Yes. Yeah.
Dude.
It's lovely.
Well, I don't know if I'd use the word lovely. But,
it's beautiful. It's moving and it's beautiful.
Yeah. It is. It's prophetic.
Yeah.
I think it does. It lifts the veil on a lot, that he's trying to do with this album. Like even just in that video, I think he blows the whole thing open.
Yeah. I mean, especially this theme of like a false humility that is sometimes like imposed upon people or foisted upon people, which is actually kind of abusive, right? It's not humility in the sense of like doing war with the ego, right? And kind of like leading to more sort of inner penitence or whatever it is. It's like, know your place because you're a cog in this machine, right? Not this hierarchy, not this holy order where we're all sort of members of the body, unique and unrepeatable members of the body, but like you're down there, I'm up here for a reason, right? Yeah. Like, and that's which again connects with that like line, like we prayed about it. Slavery's fine. Like that's
sit down.
No.
Be humble. Sit down. Be humble. Sit down. Be humble. Like there's so much to it, which because that's like that itself is a sentiment that is not necessarily incorrect, right? Like sit down, be humble. All of that, but we conflate kind of that with like this false kind of like meekness, right? Like, I was talking with my friend about this idea yesterday, and he was like, it'd be like like LeBron James, right? Like, who's just this incredible basketball player, if someone was like, you are just so amazing at basketball. And he's like, no, I'm not that good. Like, no. It'd be obnoxious.
Yeah. It's a lie. It's what it would be.
It's a lie. Because it's playing into this, like, still like people pleasy, being who people want me to be. I'm still concerned about what you think about me ultimately. Right. It's this like pride, vainglory. Have you heard that Lonely Island song, the humble rap or whatever?
Yes.
I am by far the most humblest, number one at the top of the humble list. It's so good. My apple crumble is the crumblest, but I don't brag just out of humbleness. Like
my apple crumble is the crumblest. What a great verse.
Yeah, I know, it's the best. And it feels a little bit like that, but like that's not what true humility is. And that's what Lonely Island is just so great at doing all the time with everything that they do, of like
just exploding
fully
it
into and like again lifting the veil on like this is the stuff that people do and call it, humility. But I think like what he does in that song, he actually especially like in the first part of it, it's like so braggadocio.
Yes.
He's very not humble as we would think about it.
Yeah.
Right. But when you kind of go through it, in some ways, what he's actually just doing is kind of like telling the truth about himself, about the world, about all of it.
Yeah.
And I think that like that is where, you get like what true humility looks like, right? It's like it's a sober recognition of what actually is, both in myself and in the world, and he exalts that, in the way that only Kendrick Lamar can do. Like, and even in that video, right, with his use of the Ethiopian vestments, in the very beginning, like it's just it's this exaltation of this like rich liturgical life in blackness. And it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful like shot of the light shining on him in a genre that is dominated by like language that sounds violent and other things that we tend to think of, right? It's incredible.
Because it's a sort of glorification of what is, right? It's not a masquerade, it's not a facade, it's not sort of like puffing up. It's kind of like it's a celebration, right? Which I think like is still humble, because the posture of humility is, and it's not a lie, though when we sort of do humility sometimes, like your LeBron James example, I think is like, it nails it on the head. Like that's a lie. If LeBron was to say like, I'm not the best in the world, like that's a lie. Yeah, stop. It's like if somebody's choking in a restaurant and you ask for a doctor and there's a doctor there and he's like, nah, I don't want to draw attention to myself, right? And just eats his food as somebody dies. This isn't about me. It's not about me.
Yeah. No. It's not my time. It's not my time.
Pass the butter. Pass the butter. But like that's not what humility is, right? Like like humility can actually be confident, right? Humility like can actually be kind of like assertive in some sort of way. And I think one of the things that makes this humble too is that it's this look right at this bigger picture. It's not even like Kendrick Lamar looking at himself specifically, but it's kind of like shining a light outwards, because it's not sort of like puffery or but again, there is a tension there, right? But
yes, totally. And I think he knows that, which is why he ends up telling himself, sit down, be humble. Right. But then there's also like the thing that makes it, interesting is like the voice in the background that he throws in, which is saying little b, right? Sit down, little b word. And so there is this kind of, again, like this tension of like, but doing that also puts you in this position of subservience that is not true humility. Right. And you get that even in the image when all the men are like with their heads down, but at the very end, they're all dressed in suits and looking up. Right. Kind of there fully as they are. Which is just amazing. And so I think for Kendrick, there is like this idea of true humility looks at what is and takes full responsibility for it, which is why there's that line where he says like, show me something natural, right? Like Afro on Richard Pryor, or like he wants to see models with stretch marks, and he even goes on to say like, and if I kill somebody, I'm not going to blame the alcohol, because I'm like, I'm just being real. Like it is 100% me. I killed that guy. I'm not blaming it on anything else.
Yeah.
I killed that guy. And it's just like, oh man, like that is actually what true humility does.
Yeah.
It says like, this is me.
And which takes responsibility too, as well, which is kind of like one of the poles we were talking about, that sort of like the polarity between like taking responsibility for yourself and like there are so many of these songs where, because he's doing both in this album, right? He's looking at the big picture thing, but he's also looking into his own heart, right? And kind of like accepting like, I am guilty of murder, right? Like I'm not gonna make excuses. I'm not gonna sort of do what Adam and Eve did, right? I mean, like there's this kind of like this, like, I'm gonna take ownership. When I hear the footsteps of the Lord in the garden, like it's me, it's my fault. Which is humility, not to deflect blame, not to sort of, blame it on the alcohol or whatever it is. Like it's the truth.
Yeah. And so then there is like, again, it ends up being this tension of like, wickedness and weakness. Like it's actually really kind of neither, right? Like it's like a strength that's born out of humility, and it's only true humility like from God, right? Like God is the one who gives us this true humility, this ability to kind of like stand in ourselves fully. Kind of knowing we're embraced and knowing that we're loved. And I think that like this is, again, like the unique kind of perspective that Lamar brings to Christianity in kind of like a mainstream way. And you get that, I think, too, kind of like because I'm just, even as you're saying this stuff, I'm thinking about like Jesus, like who is, humble and meek and all of these things but he doesn't like just, okay, whatever you say. Right?
He overturns the tables of the money changers. I mean,
and they're like, are you the Christ? And he's like, yeah.
Because it's the truth.
Like, he goes, I can kill you, right? He was like, well,
can you though?
Yeah, like the only reason you can is because like I say so.
Yeah.
And that's not like him being braggy. Like that's actually humility. You know, like and honestly, it's like that kind of stuff. Like the way you've heard it said to you, right? And who's he talking about there? By Moses, who is like the Jewish dude that everyone's like, Moses. And so he goes like, so Moses said to you this, but I say to you, like, right? Like that, he's like, I'm gonna one up Moses.
Yeah, because he's greater than Moses, and that's not a brag. It's not a brag. No. It's the truth.
So when Kendrick stands up there and goes, I'm the greatest, there is kind of a precedence for it. It doesn't mean that you necessarily are going to like him.
Yeah.
You might be like, this guy's kind of a jerk.
And his, as we said at the top, his album was the first, non-classical, he won the Pulitzer Prize with this album. Like, he's good. So
it's good.
He's good.
And like, also people didn't like Jesus. Like he was kind of riffraff. And him and his crew, and this is what's I love in that
yes, it's a powerful visual.
In the video, like there's this thing where like there's a shot where Kendrick and his homies are like sitting at the Last Supper, like they are
like Da Vinci,
the Last Supper,
like Da Vinci style, the long table.
They're like reenacting it, and Kendrick is in Jesus's seat, and he's got all of his buddies there, and they're like passing bottles, and they're like kind of rowdy and raucous and like partying and like whatever. And at first, I think the knee-jerk response is to go like, oh, like is this blasphemy? Is this blasphemy? I don't know if this is blasphemy, because then I think what you begin to realize, right, is that like there's something, that's like so spiritually true about this, that there's this kind of this like phrase that comes from like liberation theology, right? Jesus was black. And that doesn't necessarily mean, right, that physically, and it may be something to do with his actual genetic propensities. I don't know, but I think Kendrick is much more onto like a spiritual idea with this, as I talked about with my friend Deacon Rico yesterday. And he's sitting there surrounded by his gangster homies at the Last Supper. Like he lifts the veil again for us, right? That like Jesus is not this whitewashed dude who just sits there politely. If we can't see Jesus in Kendrick at the table with his homies, then I don't think that we necessarily get what Jesus was about. That like they were seen as renegades and misfits, which is why everyone wanted to kill them. they were even possibly seen as dangerous. And like, there's something that's so powerful to that, especially when you kind of end up putting it next to the Pentecost image in that, which is like Kendrick just like standing there peacefully rapping with his head on fire and his buddies behind him with heads on fire.
Yeah.
You know, like you get these incredible like tongues of flame.
Yeah.
And you're just going like, wait a minute. Oh my gosh, like these are the guys with the Spirit.
Yeah.
And we don't like that.
Yeah.
We want it to be the nice, you know, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus who helps us with a baseball bat.
Well, the serene, right? Kind of like static Jesus that doesn't actually make a difference in your life.
It's frozen.
Right? It's frozen and you look at it on the wall.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to, and again, I think there's like this is where the sort of like the Christian tinge to like the message that Kendrick Lamar is sort of like is bringing out there, right? Like there are calls to repentance in this album. There are calls to like his own repentance and also the people around him, right? Like it's you know, Aslan is not a tame lion, right? Like he's going to upend your world, and he's a little terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Because there's layers to that. Like even as he and his friends are sitting at the table, right? They're kind of like embodying the restless spirit and the sort of danger, right, that Christ posed to the community at the time. But also like even this deeper sense of like all of us on some level can sit in that table because we're all supposed to be able to see Jesus in every other person that we encounter.
Yes.
Right. But we don't want to see him in the outsider or the troublemaker or the person that we don't understand. Right. Because on some level, we want to be something we haven't talked about in a while. Like we want to be these like buffered selves that don't actually like get touched by any of this.
Yep.
You know, we want to possess the message of the gospel rather than have the message of the gospel like possess and change and challenge us. You know, it's like even this, one of my favorite songs on the album, I think it's Lust, where he talks about this like idealized sort of hedonistic day. And he talks about like, you know, smoking and doing your thing. Right. But it all culminates like, this is empty. Like the song itself actually sort of ends with like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
This can't be all there is. Right. I mean, like it's the amazing tension of like, he's standing in the midst of this, not being judgy, but also kind of to judge, right. To say like, fix yourself, get right.
And ends with him going back into it.
Yeah. Well, because of that complexity, like,
yes,
because he's still broken, because he's still broken.
Don't we all do that? Like, I really need to stop overeating. Ow.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, I really need to, you know, stop with whatever thing, judging people. That guy's really ugly. This is just the difficulty. You know,
this is the difficulty of, I mean, like the fact that like, what do? Right. We kind of like, we work for the church. Like our job is to sort of preach and teach, but you and I both know, like we are far from perfect people. Priest friends of ours,
you're
right?
Further. You're further though. Let's be clear. Let all listeners note that Steve is further from perfect than Christian.
I humbly accept. Thank you.
Oh, don't be all LeBron James about this.
My apple crumb is the crumbliest.
You're right. I am the worst. No. I'm the worst. No. I am foul.
This is the classic seminary joke. Like, don't ever let somebody hold the door for you in seminary because it's literally going to be like, after you. Oh, I insist, sir, after you. And just this like endless cycle of like one-upsmanship and humility. And nobody ever makes it through the door. So just walk.
That. Yeah, I love that.
But that's the thing, like, and even like, you know, priest friends of ours, right? Like, because we both know people like very intimately, right, who are clergy and get to like stand in front of the mysteries, and like there's no perfection there, but it's this tension, right? Like sanctity is like, so a big part of it is like the posture of our lives, right, and our faithfulness towards God, even in the midst of the stumble and struggles, right? There's no sort of like hermetically sealed, like dust-free museum quality, whatever. Like we're all struggling. The question is, are we struggling towards, right?
Yes. And I think that this is what actually makes, you know, Kendrick's line and refrain, "Ain't nobody praying for me," so on the one hand, tragic and sad, right? Because like, you know, he's like, grandma's dead and I don't got nobody. Yeah. And so you feel for that, like, oh man, like this guy's been abandoned by kind of like other people, right? But I think what also is incredibly, it's also incisive and convicting, right? Because I think that he's constantly kind of Another thing that he does all throughout the album is take on Fox News, and Fox News is like
Mm.
relationship with him, which is kind of always portraying him as kind of like dangerous and bad and radical, kind of like,
this
you know,
thug.
this thug. And so he kind of like, I think, lifts the veil on how easy it is for us to be like, ugh, like that guy and whatever. And he's kind of like, but you're not praying for me either.
Mm.
You know, like ain't nobody praying for me. And to me, like there's this really difficult, I think, idea that like, yeah, you can condemn me and criticize me, how vulgar I am as being unchristian, but at the end of the day, you don't really care about me.
Yeah.
Or my soul. So I'm kind of damned if I do, and I'm kind of damned if I don't.
Yeah.
You know?
Which is I think the logical conclusion of this like me versus you, like individualistic sort of world, right? Like we're all we are to each other are punching bags, right? We're all we are is sort of like ideological opponents. Where all we are is just kind of like things to be opposed or things to be sort of used, trophies, right? But and that's I think where like another place where he breaks down even this opposition, right? Because on a superficial level, it's like he's holding up Fox News as like and Geraldo Rivera, right? And like he loops this thing that he says about him. But he takes it to his own audience, right? Is another way that he breaks down this dichotomy. And he's like, all of us are doing this, right? All of us are abandoning each other. We're all in it for ourselves, and it's isolating and it's tragic and it's lonely, but it's not the way.
Yeah. Oh,
we just scratched the surface. We're not even
my gosh, we didn't even get anywhere with this, but it I feel like I dominated the conversation. I'm sorry. I was so excited to talk about this album because I was up till, like 12:30 last night and, try to go to bed hours before that, like thinking through this, writing about it, reading about it. Like I was just like, I was like, it's so much. So much.
No, one of the great things of doing this with you is that I feel like I have a sense of something when I come in and you just unlock and unpack so much for me, and like your enthusiasm for a particular work of art is like contagious. So I like this album more after talking with you. You know?
Yeah, same.
Which is why this is like this is how like art needs to be done. Art needs to be enjoyed with like friends, people you love, and like, and you can talk about it. You can open up your heart, and you can like,
Yeah. And I would have no problem. And I think like this is one of the important things too, is to say like this is art.
Yeah.
Right. Like it is art. It is not everything that's out there is art. A lot of pop is definitely not art. It's just candy. But this album is art, and art makes us uncomfortable, and it gives us a safe context, I think, to deal with really hard things. Like I think that's the beauty of art, right?
Yeah.
Like we've been reading Harry Potter to our daughters, and we just read the fifth one. Or finishing the fifth one in the next day or two.
Nice.
And spoiler alert ish. Sirius Black, Harry's godfather, dies in the fifth one. But we've already talked about that. And we read that part the other night, and my 10-year-old just like sobbed. She was so distraught because it was like, she felt it. Like she's like, Harry's been so lonely, and like he had no one, and he's finally had someone who was like a dad to him, and now he's gone, and he's gone, and he's gone. And like, and that's what happens.
Yeah.
Like these things happen.
Yeah.
And we have to figure out like how we're gonna deal with it. We can't just be like, no, until like reality smacks you in the face and your actual dad dies.
Yes.
Then you're like totally unprepared to even know how to grieve.
Yeah.
Right.
This isn't what happens in the world.
Yeah. No. It's everyone turns out fine. Like this is why heroes and stories have to die sometimes, and why guides have to die, because we lose our guides. We do lose our guides, and stories help us explore that. And I think again, in true art, it'll help us do that. It gives us a safe context to explore really scary things in ourselves. Like they show us the dragons that are in our hearts.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, much more a beautiful and important part of why we have to do this. Like we have to do it.
Yes.
We must. So
yes. And I'll take it even like a step further. This at the very top, I was talking about the next episode of Be the Bee and how the publican and the Pharisee, when it comes, obviously you and I worked on the script, so you know what I'm talking about. But when people watch the episode, like there's just kind of like something about online orthodoxy. Like, I think this is why that sort of Be the Bee mentality is behind of so much of what we do. Like the attempt to be sort of obsessed with Jesus and to constantly like be looking for him and to be celebrating where we see him at work, sometimes in these like unexpected situations, like that's got to be the posture of Christianity, not like looking for things to condemn, looking for things, obsessed with the darkness, obsessed with like conspiracies and this and that.
They're
like,
coming
that
for
corrupts you. Yeah.
Just like I said at the beginning of this, we're coming for you.
We're coming for you.
We know where you live. It's what Rohr said, right? That it's to find God in all things. He says, even especially in pain and suffering, that which is sinful. Like, that's what it means to like have this theology of the cross, like to find him in everything, even in the sinful stuff. He goes, even maybe especially, like that's what truly like the contemplative mind does, right? The mind that is fully rendered to God is just like, I see him everywhere. I can walk into a room full of crap and I know where the one flower, I know where the flower is. I can see him in this room full of crap. Can't you?
Yeah.
You know? So,
but that's the thing. We don't do this alone, right? Like we have these conversations with people that we know and trust, because you don't want to like accidentally be letting yourself get astray, right? Like the point is to be seeking him, right? Like even when we're in the midst of some of this pain, not to sort of sink into the pain, right? But to like, as Kendrick sort of like offers this prophetic word in the midst of this nonsense, like we have to remember why we're here and why we're doing this. And we don't do that alone, which is again, why it's so much fun to talk about these things and explore these things with you.
Totally. Well, do you want to close us out, Steve-O?
No, I'm going to turn it to you for our philanthropy corner. So
Philanthropy corner.
Yeah, this is the thing we've been doing for a few months now. At the end of every episode, we talk about like we just want to shine a light on some good work that's happening out there, like faith in action, people who are actually loving their neighbor and like living out the gospel. Right? We talked about this. It's not individual. It's not just the world. It's got to be both. And so we want to shine a light on some of this. And you've got a great candidate for today's corner.
Yeah. So our friend Christina Andresen actually informed me about this place. But I think I had come across it before somewhere too. Maybe some other friend had shared it with me. But it's like a healthcare kind of Christian healthcare alternative. I don't know how else to describe it, because they don't really call themselves insurance.
Alternative.
Yeah, well, they don't call themselves insurance though.
But it's like an alternative. Like it's not really healthcare provider, right? It's like the paying for healthcare.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's called Samaritan Ministries, and it just seems like a really cool and interesting kind of take on how to pay for healthcare and to make it affordable for yourself and for other people. As Christians are provided with an opportunity to provide care and a compassionate response to one another. So it's really kind of seen as like a cost-sharing approach to healthcare. And it comes down really to just simply saying like, hey, we're the church, we're the body of Christ, and we want to take that seriously, and we want to take care of one another instead of having to like, deal with the headaches of insurance and things like this. And it's cool. They give you options. You can, enlist for like a certain amount and whatever, like there's different ways of doing it. They have no kind of like in-network because they're not insurance, right? But rather you get to choose the provider that you think is best for you. And it's kind of a collective for people to pay. It just seems like a cool option, maybe for those who can't afford full-on insurance, but who do have healthcare needs. And I won't go on and on about it, but it's definitely worth checking out if you're interested. And you can find them at www.samaritanministries.org. Really worth checking out. So,
yeah. And if you missed that link, it's in the doobly-doo. As always, don't worry, we got you covered. That's cool. And I think like that sort of stuff, right, is so exciting because it's again really cool to see Christians offering kind of Christian alternatives to some of these things that are kind of broken or inaccessible for people, right? I mean, when it comes to healthcare, finance, whatever it is, right? Like, I don't know, it's a cool challenge. Why don't we have more Christian credit unions? Why don't we have more Christian like healthcare alternatives, right? Why?
Yeah. Maybe we can do things about that.
I mean, possibly.
instead of not doing things about that.
Possibly. Stay tuned. But that's it for today.
Right.
So the plan is next time we'll be back and we'll be talking about Donald Glover's FX series Atlanta, I think is the plan for next time.
Yep. Continuing with our spotlight on Black History Month, which I think is a cool thing to be able to kind of step into, like, oh, this is not my experience. I am very white. And
yes, you may not be able to tell on the audio version of this podcast, but that is true for both of us.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, but it's awesome, and it's challenging and it's rewarding. And yeah, if nothing else, I would like to go listen to Damn one more time today or tomorrow, because this was a nice way to unpack it further. So
I want to listen to it in reverse.
Yeah, right.
Just to see how it feels.
I
have a feeling I'll feel sad at the end.
Yeah, it sounds like the heavy way to do it. Yeah,
I like ending with, like, it's, kind of okay.
Yeah, I mean that mercy, like this act of mercy, breaking that cycle. Like even though there's the gun punch of the shotgun at the end, like there's still, I don't know, there's something very palate cleansing about that last track.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we can go another 4 hours if we do this. Like, we're done.
Let's not. All righty.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.